The gangster rap world has been shaken again, this time by the violent death of the performer known as Notorious B.I.G.
For 28 years, the murder of the notorious B.I.G. haunted hip-hop like a ghost that refused to fade. His death sparked conspiracy theories, rivalries, and unanswered questions.
Biggie was shot 4 times. There's no burning or soot deposit around any of these perforations. These were not gunshot wounds from a point-blank range.
Fans demanded justice, yet the LAPD stayed quiet. But now, in 2025, a former detective has revealed exactly who pulled the trigger and why. It's not just shocking, it's disturbing. The truth not only points fingers, it confirms long-whispered suspicions that go deeper than anyone imagined. After 28 years of silence, Biggie's mystery is finally solved, and the truth is bad. The night Biggie Smalls was gunned down. On the night of March 8th, 1997, Los Angeles was alive with celebrity energy. The Soul Train Music Awards had just wrapped, drawing stars and industry legends into the heart of the city. Among them was Christopher Wallace, better known to the world as the Notorious B.I.G. It was his first major public appearance on the West Coast since the death of Tupac Shakur just 6 months earlier. Despite tension still lingering from the East Coast-West Coast rivalry, Biggie was there to promote peace and his upcoming double album, Life After Death. Later that night, Biggie joined dozens of celebrities at a Vibe magazine after-party held at the Peterson Automotive Museum. He arrived with his close friend and producer, Sean Puffy Combs, and their entourages. Security was tight, but the atmosphere was light. Photographers captured Biggie laughing, posing with fans, and moving through the crowd with calm confidence. To those around him, he seemed relaxed, like a man finally settling into his superstardom. But less than an hour after midnight, everything changed. At around 12:45 a.m. on March 9th, Biggie and his team decided to leave the party early. They piled into a convoy of vehicles, with Biggie riding in the front passenger seat of a dark green GMC Suburban. Puffy's vehicle was ahead, and security followed closely behind. The streets of Los Angeles were unusually crowded for that time of night, and as the caravan came to a stop at the intersection of Fairfax Avenue and Wilshire Boulevard, no one imagined that they were seconds from disaster. As Biggie's SUV idled at the red light, a black Chevy Impala rolled up beside it on the driver's side. Witnesses later said the car appeared to move deliberately, slowing to a crawl before pulling even with Biggie's vehicle. Then, from the driver's window, a lone gunman opened fire with a 9mm pistol. 4 bullets struck Biggie. He slumped over in his seat, mortally wounded. The driver immediately sped off towards Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, just minutes away, with security vehicles racing alongside them. Paramedics worked frantically, but it was no use. At 1:15 a.m., Biggie was pronounced dead at just 24 years old. The murder happened in front of dozens of potential witnesses, and yet the killer vanished into the night. Witness accounts were conflicting. Some said the shooter wore a bow tie. Others described a clean getaway. A nearby bank surveillance camera may have captured part of the scene, but the footage was too grainy and distant to identify the shooter. The black Impala disappeared into the darkness of Los Angeles, never to be recovered. What made the situation even more explosive was the timing. Just 6 months earlier, Tupac Shakur had been gunned down in Las Vegas. He too had been 25. Both hip-hop's biggest icons were now gone, struck down in strangely similar drive-by shootings. The public didn't see it as coincidence, they saw a connection. Speculations spread quickly. Fans, media outlets, and conspiracy theorists all pointed fingers. Was it revenge? A gang-related hit? A record label power move? The tragic irony was impossible to ignore. Just days before his death, Biggie had given an interview saying he was ready to move beyond the feud. He had even named his upcoming album Life After Death. After his shocking murder, the title felt hauntingly prophetic. The question on everyone's mind was the same: who killed Biggie Smalls? As grief turned to outrage, fans and journalists alike began digging into the East Coast-West Coast rivalry that had once turned friends into enemies. They hoped that within the bitterness and betrayal of hip-hop's most dangerous feud, they might find answers. East versus West, the rap feud that turned fatal. Before the bullets and betrayal, there was a friendship. In the early 1990s, Tupac Shakur and Christopher Biggie Wallace were more than fellow rappers. They were allies navigating the sharp rise of hip-hop. Tupac even let Biggie crash on his couch, gave him performance tips, and showed him around the industry. The two respected each other's talent. For a brief moment, the East and West were united in their grind. But everything changed on November 30th, 1994, in New York City's Quad Recording Studios. That night, Tupac arrived at the Quad Recording Studios for a session. As he entered the building's lobby, 3 armed men ambushed him in what appeared to be a robbery attempt gone violently wrong. He was shot 5 times, but miraculously survived. Still, the wounds went beyond the physical. Within hours, Tupac became convinced the attack wasn't random. He believed he'd been set up, and that the people who lured him to the studio knew it was coming. At the time of the shooting, Biggie Smalls and Sean Puffy Combs were reportedly already inside the building. To Tupac, that was no coincidence. He suspected they either had prior knowledge or were somehow involved in orchestrating the setup. Though Biggie and Puffy both denied any connection to the attack, Tupac's trust was destroyed. From that moment on, he viewed his former friends as enemies. Shortly afterward, Tupac was convicted in a separate case involving SA charges and sentenced to prison. While incarcerated, he grew more bitter and paranoid. By the time he was released in 1995 and signed with Death Row Records, the East Coast-West Coast feud had begun to boil, and it would only get worse from there. Tupac didn't hold back. In 1996, he dropped Hit 'Em Up, one of the most vicious diss tracks in hip-hop history. In it, he claimed to have slept with Biggie's wife, Faith Evans, and launched personal attacks against Puff Daddy and Bad Boy Records. It wasn't just lyrical warfare, it was personal. The feud spiraled beyond music. It became a regional war. Death Row versus Bad Boy, Los Angeles versus New York, Suge Knight versus Puff Daddy. The East Coast-West Coast rivalry took over magazine covers, radio waves, and award shows. Fans were split as the media stoked the flames, and behind the scenes, the beef turned dangerous. Tensions came to a head at the 1995 Source Awards, where boos, threats, and subliminal shots created a sense that hip-hop was on the edge of something terrible. That feeling became real when Tupac was gunned down in Las Vegas on September 13, 1996. He died 6 days later. Though never officially tied to Biggie, many believed Tupac's death was connected to the East-West feud, and Biggie's name floated in whispers of revenge. So when Biggie was shot and killed just 6 months later, the public didn't view it as an isolated tragedy. They saw it as retaliation. The perception that Biggie's death was payback for Tupac's killing added a new layer of darkness to the feud. And now, with both of hip-hop's brightest stars gone, questions outnumbered answers, and a deadly pattern had begun. But as fans grieved, the investigation into Biggie's murder was already beginning to unravel, and not in the way anyone expected. A case gone cold. LAPD's failed investigation. In the days following Biggie Smalls' murder, fans expected swift justice. After all, this wasn't just any victim. He was one of the most famous rappers in the world, gunned down in the heart of Los Angeles, in a public space surrounded by witnesses and security. But weeks passed, then months, and no arrest was made. Behind the scenes, the LAPD investigation was falling apart. From the start, the case was plagued by disorganization and missteps. Leads weren't followed up. Witnesses weren't properly interviewed. Evidence reportedly vanished or was mishandled. One major problem was fear. There was fear within the department of where the evidence might lead. As suspicions grew that officers inside the LAPD might be connected to Biggie's death, the investigation quietly slowed. Over time, whispers turned into allegations. Investigative journalists and insiders began pointing to possible links between LAPD officers and death row records. But none of this was officially pursued in court. Instead of getting closer to justice, the case grew colder with every year. In 2002, Biggie's mother, Valletta Wallace, and his ex-wife, Faith Evans, took matters into their own hands. They filed a civil lawsuit against the LAPD, accusing the department of corruption, negligence, and intentionally covering up the involvement of rogue officers in the murder. The lawsuit included shocking claims, including that LAPD officials had destroyed key documents and blocked internal probes to protect the department's image. But the legal system didn't budge. The case was dismissed, not because the allegations were disproven, but because of procedural roadblocks and lack of cooperation. A second lawsuit was filed in 2007. This time, with new witness statements and deeper claims of cover-up. It too was dismissed before reaching a final judgment. The FBI even stepped in for a brief period in the early 2000s, launching its own inquiry into Biggie's murder. Yet they too abandoned the case without charges or resolution, citing insufficient evidence and limited cooperation from local authorities. For Biggie's family, the legal failures weren't just disappointing, they were devastating. "They know who killed my son," Valletta Wallace once said in a public interview, "but they're not going to do anything because it would expose too much." For the next 2 decades, the case remained technically open, but no one was arrested. The murder of the notorious B.I.G. became a textbook example of a justice system that protects its own before it protects the truth. And in the vacuum left behind, theories, a shadowy list of suspects, motives, and unanswered questions haunted the case for years. Suspects, allegations, and theories that haunted the case. At the center of many of those theories was Suge Knight, the co-founder of Death Row Records and Tupac Shakur's label boss. Suge and Biggie were on opposite ends of the explosive East Coast-West Coast rap feud. Tupac, his star artist, had been gunned down just 6 months before Biggie, in what many believed was an ambush by rivals. While Suge was publicly grieving, some speculated that he had ordered Biggie's murder in retaliation or to settle deeper scores in the business of rap. Suge always denied involvement, calling the rumors nonsense, but the cloud of suspicion never lifted. Another persistent theory involved rogue LAPD officers with ties to Death Row Records. One name that kept surfacing was David Mack, a former LAPD cop who was convicted in 1997 for masterminding a brazen bank robbery. Mack had alleged gang affiliations and a known affinity for flashy cars, traits that eerily mirrored the black Chevy Impala used in Biggie's drive-by shooting. Investigative journalist Chuck Phillips and former LAPD detective Russell Poole both believed Mac may have played a direct role in either planning or executing the murder. But beyond his connections and criminal background, many questioned what would he stand to gain. According to Poole, Mac's potential motives were financial and personal. He was deeply loyal to Suge Knight and the Bloods-affiliated network around Death Row Records. By assisting in Biggie's murder, Mac could have earned large sums of cash under the table, secured protection from powerful gang figures, and proven himself as a trusted asset in Knight's orbit. In a world where money, status, and loyalty meant survival, Mac had plenty of incentive to get involved, and his subsequent conviction only deepened the suspicion. To some, Mac wasn't just a corrupt cop, he was a willing participant. Connected to Mac was Amir Muhammad, a friend of Mac's, and a man Russell Poole suspected to be the actual triggerman. Poole claimed Muhammad matched witness descriptions of the shooter and had financial ties to both Mac and Death Row Records. However, Amir Muhammad denied all accusations and was never arrested. The evidence remained largely circumstantial, and official investigations never pursued the lead to completion. Adding fuel to the fire, some even speculated about Sean Puff Daddy Combs, Biggie's friend and label boss at Bad Boy Records. A few fringe theories questioned whether there were tensions between them over business deals or life insurance policies. These ideas were widely rejected by most investigators, and no credible evidence has ever surfaced linking Puff Daddy to the crime. Still, his closeness to the scene on the night of the murder kept his name in the conversation, especially among conspiracy theorists. Books, documentaries, and TV specials continued to dig into these theories. The 2002 documentary Biggie and Tupac by Nick Broomfield and the 2018 series Unsolved: The Murders of Tupac and the Notorious B.I.G. both spotlighted the David Amir Muhammad theory and LAPD corruption as central themes. Former detective Russell Poole, who worked the case early on, later claimed that his investigation was shut down by higher-ups once it began pointing toward other officers. His claims were controversial, but they resonated with a public desperate for answers. Despite all these names, connections, and theories, the bottom line remained unchanged. The case had no conviction, no official suspect, and no closure. But that finally changed 28 years after the murder, when the most credible insider yet spoke up again and revealed exactly who was behind the trigger. Finally solved: the man who killed Biggie Smalls. After 28 years of silence, dead ends, and swirling theories, one former insider has brought the truth to light, and it's bad. According to retired LAPD detective Greg Kading, the case of who killed the notorious B.I.G. is no longer a mystery. It's finally solved. Though Kading first revealed his findings more than a decade ago, in 2025, his conclusions are finally being accepted as the definitive answer to one of hip-hop's most haunting crimes. Kading didn't work the case in its earliest days. Instead, he was brought in during the late 2000s to lead a joint federal task force investigating the unsolved murders of Tupac Shakur and Biggie Smalls. The mission was clear: find out what really happened, without the politics and power plays that had plagued the original LAPD investigation. What Kading uncovered was damning. According to his findings, based on interviews, confidential informants, and sworn testimony, the man who pulled the trigger that night in March 1997 wasn't David Mack or Amir Muhammad. It was Wardell Poochie Faus, a known member of the mob Piru Bloods gang and a close associate of Suge Knight. Faus wasn't just a street-level enforcer, he was a trusted muscle, someone Suge allegedly used before when he wanted something done quietly but effectively. At the time of Biggie's murder, Suge Knight was behind bars in LA County Jail, but Kading explains how that didn't stop him. In order for him to communicate with somebody on the street, he had to go through an intermediary, Kading said. That go-between was a woman, believed to be Suge's girlfriend, who frequently visited him, posing as a legal assistant. Because of that cover, her conversations with Knight weren't monitored like regular inmate visits. According to Kading, this woman later gave a full statement to both the LAPD and FBI in 2009 under a confidentiality agreement. She claimed Suge Knight gave her direct orders to coordinate Biggie's murder from behind bars. Her role was to act as the link between Suge and Faus. She said she relayed Suge's instructions and helped arrange the payment that would go to Poochie for the hit. In Kading's account, Suge ordered the murder as an act of retaliation for Tupac's death. Though many believed Biggie had no involvement in that killing, Suge reportedly blamed the East Coast camp and wanted to send a message. This was about retaliation, not business, Kading writes in his book Murder Rap. For Kading, the case has long been closed. "We know who did it," he has said repeatedly. His findings weren't a hunch or wild theory. They were supported by multiple informants, including Suge Knight's ex-girlfriend, all telling the same story. Back in 2009, when Kading first presented these findings, they were met with controversy and skepticism. But over time, more and more experts, journalists, and law enforcement veterans have come to view Kading's version as the most credible. And now, in 2025, that perspective has reached a turning point. "It's not a question mark anymore," Kading insisted. "They ought to satisfy history by saying, this is the truth, and this is why we can't prosecute it, but it is solved." In 2025, that statement is finally resonating. But why hasn't anyone been arrested or charged for the murder of the notorious B.I.G? So, why no arrests? With former LAPD detective Greg Kading declaring the Biggie Smalls murder finally solved and naming Wardell Poochie Faus as the shooter, allegedly under orders from Suge Knight, many expected justice would soon follow. But no one has been arrested or charged. The natural question is, why not? The most obvious answer lies in the fate of the alleged killer himself. Poochie Faus is dead. He was murdered in 2003, shot multiple times while riding his motorcycle in Compton. With him dead, the possibility of a trial for the man who allegedly pulled the trigger vanished. There would be no confession, no courtroom testimony, and no jury. Also, Suge's girlfriend's cooperation initially helped piece the puzzle together, but it fell apart when time came to take things to court. She allegedly refused to testify. Without her public testimony, prosecutors lacked the backbone of their case. Complicating matters further, Suge Knight is already serving a 28-year prison sentence for an unrelated 2015 hit-and-run case that left a man dead. In the eyes of many in law enforcement, the man believed to be behind Biggie's murder is already behind bars. Pursuing an entirely new case, tied to old evidence and shaky witness cooperation, may have seemed unnecessary or even politically risky. Then there's the role of the LAPD and FBI. According to Kading and others, these agencies prefer to keep the case technically open, rather than confront the deeper issues it might expose. The original investigation had long been marred by allegations of corruption, especially regarding potential involvement from rogue officers. Pushing forward with arrests or making official statements could reopen old wounds and spark lawsuits from Biggie's family or others against the city of Los Angeles. The difference in how Biggie's case was handled compared to Tupac Shakur's only deepens the frustration. In 2023, Dwayne Keefe D. Davis, a former gang member, was arrested for Tupac's murder after a grand jury deemed there was enough evidence for prosecution. While that case also took decades to progress, it showed that law enforcement was still willing to act when the conditions were right. In Biggie's case, however, there is no living triggerman and no cooperating witness willing to go on the record. There is also far less political appetite to dredge up the corruption scandals that had haunted the LAPD for years. In the end, many believe the system simply did what it wanted all along: let the case fade quietly. While the public has gotten its answer through Kading's work, the legal system gave no closure, no handcuffs, no trial, just the lingering sense that the truth, while known, may never be officially acknowledged. Biggie's legacy, the King of New York. When the news broke that the notorious B.I.G. had been murdered, the world stood still. His body had not yet returned to New York when the mourning began. On March 18, 1997, tens of thousands flooded the streets of Brooklyn for his funeral procession. Traffic stopped, crowds wept, radios blasted his lyrics, bystanders shouted, "Biggie, Biggie," as the hearse passed. It wasn't just a farewell, it was the funeral of a king. Biggie's family, especially his mother Valletta Wallace, became vocal in the years that followed. Valletta was heartbroken, but determined. She worked tirelessly to keep her son's name alive and to demand accountability. Faith Evans, Biggie's widow, and his friend and producer Puff Daddy, now Diddy, paid their respects through music. Their song "I'll Be Missing You" became an anthem of grief and remembrance. It topped charts worldwide and etched Biggie's memory into pop culture forever. But it was Biggie's music that truly carried his spirit forward. His debut album, Ready to Die, introduced the world to a gifted storyteller from Brooklyn. His follow-up, Life After Death, released just weeks after his murder, became one of the most acclaimed rap albums of all time. Both records remain cultural landmarks, studied by artists and adored by fans across generations. In 2020, the notorious B.I.G. was posthumously inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. This was a rare honor for a rapper, and one that confirmed what the world already knew. Biggie wasn't just a great rapper, he was an icon. His children, C.J. Wallace and Tiana Wallace, have also played a role in continuing their father's legacy. While not musicians themselves, they've become stewards of his image, involved in businesses and documentaries that honor his memory. And now, with the case finally considered solved by insiders like Greg Kading, the cloud that lingered over Biggie's name begins to lift. Justice may never come in court, but the truth has stepped into the light. In the end, Biggie's greatest legacy isn't just about how he died, but how he lived. Through every verse, every beat, and every Brooklyn block that still blasts his music, the King of New York lives on. What do you think about Biggie's death? Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.